My name is Jim Pizer, and I'm an academic visitor here at the Kennedy School. And until last January, I was the Massachusetts Secretary of Education within the Baker administration, where I served for about 8 years. In addition to today's event, we've got at least 8 other sessions confirmed that take us through the end of November. All of them on Thursdays at noon, and most of them here, and maybe hopefully all of them here in Taubman. And the upcoming topics include school finance and accountability, collective bargaining, charter schools, and school choice. So a lot of really interesting subjects and a full schedule, which is available on the PEPG website. So, and there's some actually here in hard copy on the table. So please check it out and mark your calendars. In particular, our next session is next Thursday, September 21st, which will feature Robin Lake from the Center on Reinventing Public Education, or SERPE, who will present SERPE's annual State of the American Student Report. And I hope you'll be able to join us for that session too. And we're getting this semester's Colloquium Series off to a very fast start with Alberto Carvalho, who is the superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District, which, as many of you know, is the second largest school district in the United States, which means it's pretty big. But Superintendent Carvalho took the reins in LAUSD in February of 2022, after spending most of his career as an educator and administrator in the Miami-Dade public school system, ultimately serving 14 years as superintendent. And Miami's not a small district either, so he's got a little experience in big places and big urban places in particular. His longevity and persistence within a single urban school system, and in particular his long tenure as superintendent in Miami-Dade, including his leadership through an unprecedented pandemic, is reason enough to earn our deep respect and lasting gratitude. But his track record of accomplishment, innovation, and risk-taking makes him stand out among his peers, which is reflected in the many state and national awards that he has so justly received for his public service. Just one aspect of his leadership in Florida was his embrace of parental choice and his expansion of distinctive school options, while most other superintendents adopted sort of a defensive crouch or took a position of resistance. Mr. Carvalho doubled the number of students enrolled in district-run schools of choice, even as charter schools and private school options were also rising. And today, 70% of Miami-Dade students are enrolled in schools of choice, which in his words, represent a school portfolio unlike any in the country. Since coming on board at LAUSD as superintendent just over 18 months ago, Mr. Carvalho has developed a 5-year strategic plan and concluded negotiations with the teachers union over a 3-year contract. So he's clearly off to a very fast start. His topic for today is accelerating student success through coherence, choice, and technology in an area of AI disruption. And after his comments, we should have ample time for questions and answers and some conversation. And although we'll give priority to folks in the room, to the extent there are folks listening in and watching online, we'll try to engage you as well. And please, if you have questions that you want to ask, please write them down in the chat and we'll try to get to them if we have time. And also for the record, this session is being recorded and will be posted on the PEPG website in a few days. So in effect, we're all on the record here. And with that, it's my privilege to turn the program over to Alberto Carvalho. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. I guess for the purpose of sound and video, I need to stay here, right?
If you'd like to sit, I can redirect the.
No, I'm good. I'm good staying up. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. So what I hope to accomplish here today is just give you some national perspectives and certainly some very regional perspectives. Now, having served as superintendent on both coasts, I arrived at the very interesting conclusion that the number of chromosomes that kids possess in the East Coast is exactly the same as the number of chromosomes that kids possess on the West Coast. However, when you really dive into student outcomes, there are significant differences. So I've made it my business to try to understand why those differences, and is there a way of replicating, accelerating achievement levels for students in the district that I now proudly represent. James is right. I actually served in Miami-Dade, the nation's 3rd largest district, for over 15 years, which, as Professor Peterson said earlier today, it's a very uncommon thing. We usually serve as superintendent of a large district, a mega district, in the top 10 largest district in the country, less than 3 years before you get fired or you resign. after losing your hair, aging prematurely, and going through all kinds of things. But the ride in Miami was one punctuated by and defined by uncommon practices that led to significant improvements in terms of academic achievement, reading proficiency, math proficiency as tested under NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, but also soaring graduation rates. So what I hope to accomplish is just spend a little bit of time specific to my experience in Miami, some of the practices I believe are exportable, scalable, amplifiable, not only into LA, but across the country. And then delve quickly into my more recent experience in Los Angeles by speaking about the theory of action that we're deploying there. One of Coherence. This is a district that's gone through 10 years of massive disruptions as a result of no less than 9 superintendents in 10 years. Actually, one was superintendent twice. He was the guy you go and get, bring him out of mothballs just to fill in the seat when bad things happen in the district. With seismic shifts in terms of practice protocols, policies. And as a result of that, the lack of leadership stability, amplified by labor disruptions over the past decade, certainly going back a number of years, a 6-day strike. I experienced some degree of labor strife shortly after I arrived. And I learned very quick what some of the pressures were and some of the differences between policy environments in the East Coast versus the West Coast. But I have seen nothing over the past 14 months, 15 months in Los Angeles that would tell me that the success level that can be achieved in Los Angeles cannot reach and exceed what we were able to achieve in Miami. There are a number of key ingredients are in place, and there are a number of systems that have been built at a speed and level of effectiveness that took me years to perfect in Miami. So I'm very, very hopeful about the future for Los Angeles Unified. But let me begin by detailing some of my Miami experience. Miami was in 2008 in terms of academic performance where Los Angeles pretty much is today when you look at NAEP performance, particularly 4th and 8th grade reading and mathematics. Los Angeles Unified is doing better in terms of graduation rates than Miami was back in 2008. 2008 was the year I became superintendent. Fantastic year to become a superintendent because the nation was entering the Great Recession. The Great Recession devastated budgets in both public and private sector entities, and certainly that was the case for Miami. In essence, they appointed me as superintendent. Within a month, I had to reduce the budget by $1 billion and was dealing with labor strife, not a single contract negotiated in Miami at that time. Achievement levels, very, very low compared to national average, graduation rate at 58%. However, average performance always hides, that curtain of average performance always hides pockets of severely underperforming students. And in high need schools in Miami, particularly high schools, graduation rates were as low as 34%, particularly in the iconic historic Black schools of Miami. And Miami was not number one in anything, particularly advanced academics. We're talking about college level coursework, advanced placement or dual enrollment programs. The rate of student participation in non-traditional programs, meaning programs that students would enroll on the basis of student and parental choice, was around slightly less than 30% back in 2008. Decaying facilities, no device or digital empowerment for students. That was the reality that I'm hearing. So the blessing was the actual economic recession, never allow a crisis to go to waste. We were able to do unimaginable things and blame it on the recession and get away with it. And that means new ways of launching programs, new ways of compensating teachers, and new ways of spurring reasonable, trusted school choice provided by the district for a growing number of students. New ways of empowering students with digital content and devices connectivity. New ways of re-engaging parents, allowing parents to shift from what usually is the parental mentality when it comes to education, which is supply-sided. I supply with my child. I don't ask questions. I'm not a troublemaker, and please do the best you can with the child. That transition from supply-sided parenting to demand-sided parenting, which is we're going to educate parents into being dangerous tools of accelerated education reform in the third largest district in America by teaching parents about their rights, the opportunities for their children, and empowering them with the ability to ask and demand from principals, from teachers, from the school district, from the boards, from me. You put all of that together, and a few years later, certainly Miami-Dade became a Broad-winning district, in the past referred to as the Nobel Prize of Education, a district that went from being at the bottom of the list in urban performance to the very top, where its fourth graders in reading and mathematics are number one in urban education, reading and mathematics, eighth graders number two in the country. The district that saw meteoric rise in terms of advanced placement performance, Cambridge performance, international baccalaureate performance. A district that during that time period increased the number of students participating in non-traditional programs offered by the district with a portfolio approach from less than 30% to actually the percentage has increased to over 85% of the students are currently enrolled in non-traditional programs. We're talking about career academies, charter schools, independent charter schools, district managed charter schools, K-8 centers, pre-K-12, pre-K-14 schools, magnet programs, you name it. There is something for everyone. In fact, so much so that we coined the term one size fits none in Miami. Every student, every parent ought to be in a zip code where there are real high quality options for students. We did not believe in creating options and expanding choice by creating distant programs where kids live, forcing students to be transported, and in fact, depriving those communities of the intellectual pool that resided there. So our idea of choice was to actually map out across this expansive district, Miami-Dade, the existence of high quality options, and then in a very deliberate way, offer competitive processes by which entities would come in to actually provide these high quality programs in areas where there was choice deserts in the area. By the time I left Miami-Dade in 2022, as James detailed for you, Miami-Dade was and still is seen as the highest performing urban district in America, where the graduation rate went from 58% to 95%, where the number of F-rated schools, Florida is a high stakes accountability state, where schools are rated an A through F scale, and districts are rated. And when I first became superintendent, there were dozens of schools rated F, even more so rated D. By the time I left Miami-Dade, there were zero F-rated schools, zero D-rated schools. The district improved its rating from a C to a B to an A and retained the A for all 4 years, the last 4 years that I was in Miami-Dade. During that time period, Miami-Dade distinguished itself as having the largest number of students, even compared to larger districts of students taking AP level coursework. But for us, the important thing was not just improving the denominator, the number of students taking classes at AP level, was actually to improve the numerator. So we ushered in a bold policy that said, if you take an AP level class, you have to sit for the College Board exam. That's an intimidating proposition, right? Because a lot of districts, a lot of superintendents want to have kids in AP classes, but then they select those who have a greater chance of getting a 3, 4, or 5 on a College Board exam. That was not the case in Miami, and the unnatural happened, meaning with a significant increase in the number of students taking AP classes, we saw, thus the unnatural nature of this, an increased percentage of students actually scoring the 3, 4, or 5 in a College Board. Most impressive gains, Black students and Latino students who disproportionately enrolled in these programs and as a result, earned college credit by getting a 3, 4, or 5 in these programs. During that time period, the changes and the improvements were not specific only to academic arenas. We also improved the quality of the physical space, the facilities, by passing multi-billion-dollar bond referenda with an approval rating of 72% of the people in the community saying, we so believe in the improvement and the evolution of progress in this community that we will reward you with your proposition before the voters. We did it for improvement of facilities and technological empowerment, thus putting Miami in a position where, for a district our size, we were able to be the first large district in America to reach universal connectivity and one-to-one digital empowerment with digital content available for all students and all parents. During that time period, we launched a parent academy, and annually we taught 100,000 parents on a number of courses, but the most important one, how to be a disruptive agent in a school system. Now, when I say that, a lot of my colleagues, superintendents, say, why would you do that? Look, being a superintendent in America today is tough. Being a teacher is tough. Being a principal is tough. You have to simultaneously elevate attendance rates, performance, increase graduation rates, balance the budget, negotiate contracts, provide healthcare benefits to your workforce, and then deal with the media that just love to pick apart anything and everything you do. So you need partners. And what I've learned is good to have partners who are direct beneficiaries of what you do, who are end users, consumers of what you do. And we found that by being honest and transparent and empowering parents, the community, with knowledge about the system, by first detailing the negative, not, superficially paintbrush some successes at the expense of the realities of poor performance. We found that by empowering parents, parents became a very forceful, effective voice that provided the political balance to media report and sometimes advocacy entities. And that was the journey in Miami. I remember as I was leaving and the new superintendent was hired, that superintendent said, I want to change very little of what's being done. He was one of my deputies, and the legacy of Miami continues as evidenced by the recent release of NAEP data that shows Miami-Dade continuing to outpace the country in 4th and 8th grade reading and mathematics. And then I go to Los Angeles, and I was asked by Dr. Peterson's somewhat skeptical way a little while ago, one of my classes, why? You had something so great going for you in Miami, where the rest of the world is now going to. It's like year-round vacationing. Why leave Miami to go to Los Angeles? Well, two reasons. Number one, Los Angeles is a district poised for change. It is a district that's punching below its weight. It is a district where the potential by far outpaces the current reality of performance at all levels. It is also a district where I want to prove, for the benefit of the students in the community, that effective practices there are well researched and endorsed by academic research. We can elevate the performance of all students, particularly those students in communities that have historically been underserved. Everything is there. So the past 15 months have been months to actually work at a level of accelerated drive towards coherence, the likes of which I've never done before. We've been able to realize in the first 6 months in LA things that it took me 2 to 3 years to build in Miami-Dade. That's a very, very hopeful and early sign of the possibility for long-lasting progress and eventually student outcomes. So within the first 100 days, we drafted a 100-day plan. Within that time period, we approved the first unanimously approved strategic plan for the school district, a plan that, unlike most strategic plans across the country, they're usually very thick. They're great dust gatherers because once you approve them, you never use them. You don't use them really to orient the work. This is a dynamic plan that is used. Everybody's performance evaluation is tied to the strategic goals in the strategic plan. Every one of these schools' goals, academic goals, financial goals, community engagement goals are tied to the strategic plan. Every school has a responsibility of selecting the slope of achievement towards goal, accelerated or not, meaning you could have an accelerated goal for reading if that's where you're putting your investments in year one, a less accelerated for mathematics, and then change it for the following year, as long as within the 4 year that their strategic plan lasts. And by the way, usually strategic plans are drafted for a 5-year implementation. There's no time to waste. And my promise to the community is that we will reach 5-year goals in terms of 4 years of implementation. Massive amounts of professional development, massive amount of time spent with the board and the community to reach consensus on the practices to reach these goals. So the strategic plan symbolically was important to land in terms of developing the North Star for the district, but equally important was to very quickly align practices, resources specific to functions owned by various levels and entities within the district to reach those lofty goals. I told Paul in the class of students a little while ago that more than likely, it is possible that we will not reach these. Every one of these goals is a stretch goal. And the 4 goals, you have reading, literacy goal, you have that promises improvements by 40% specific to proficiency levels, a numeracy goal with an equally impressive stretch goal, graduation rate improvements that one would look at and say, no, that's not impossible to achieve in 4 years. And I believe in stretch. I believe in throwing that pebble as far as you can into the lake, make a big splash and force everybody to jump in the lake and swim as fast as you can to grab the pebble before it hits rock bottom and bring it up to the surface. It is only then that you actually get to realize the potential of kids in some of these very large districts, which many believe are not fixable. Many believe that the mega districts of America, the Chicagos, the New Yorks, the Miamis, the LAs are not fixable. You need to break them up. You need decentralized leadership for them to succeed. The truth of the matter is that you have very small districts that don't perform well. You have medium-sized districts that don't perform well. Size is not necessarily the issue. So what could the issue be? Well, number one, I believe political courage is required in the educational leadership realm of public education. Without courage, not courage to be a hero, but the courage to actually do that which we know works, rather than experimenting with that which we have no idea whether it will work, or worse yet, embracing the road more traveled because it is the road that offers the path of least resistance, no political pressures, and you and I know that without some degree of risk, there will be no academic reward. If you do not take on some of the sacred cows that undermine the potential of students and the ability for teachers to do what they do best, more than likely the results will not follow. And we know that time and time again. And I believe that's why vast majority of superintendents across America in large districts don't make it past 3 years, because they play it safe. They play it safe to politically survive, but then because they played it safe to politically survive, the results did not materialize. And the community gets anxious and the board gets anxious and they get canned. So I have a different approach and different philosophy. My take is do everything you can to get fired and probably the results will materialize. Do the right thing unapologetically. Do the right thing in a very unforgiving way and do it quickly. I reject the premise that effective educational reform takes 10 years, 7 to 10 years to put into place. Why? Well, number one, you don't have 7 to 10 years. Everybody gets fired after 3. So you never get to realize those goals, those outcomes. So I'm a believer, as I was in Miami, now in LA, that I'll do my very best to push the envelope so aggressively, so forcefully, using research-endorsed practices, community collaboration, support for teachers, but while embracing that which we know actually makes an impact in the lives of students. So I reject the fact that 180 days of a school year for all students actually is the right thing for kids. I reject the fact that 7 hours and 20 minutes or 8 hours per day for every single student is the right approach. I reject the premise that equal funding for all students is the right approach. I believe in equity-driven funding based on the peculiar, specific dynamics and dimensions of opportunity for every single student. And by the way, we're there now. In America right now, in most districts, we operate data-rich systems that unfortunately are poorly utilized, meaning we're not fully leveraging the amount of data that we have about students, teachers, and the community. But now there's a game changer. And this is a game changer that I will speak about today. It is probably the biggest disruptor in America right now, not just as far as education is concerned, but in many fields. I come from part of the country where employees absolutely, forcefully exercise their rights. And right now, there is a long-lasting strike specific to writers and actors. Hollywood has paralyzed the creative industry of Los Angeles, of Hollywood. Very disruptive. And one of the number one issues as to why that strike continues is because there's lack of agreement on how they will manage, how the studios will manage artificial intelligence as a potential replacement to human talent. Or even, not just from a writer's perspective, even an actor's likeness and voice. Interesting stuff. I remember growing up and watching sci-fi. The sci-fi of the past is a reality today. However, in most classrooms and schools across America, the sci-fi of the past continues to be an illusion. We have not moved fast enough on the basis of what we know. You know, Maya Angelou said that once you know better, you are compelled to do better. In education, unfortunately, we have not done that necessarily. We know better, but we fail to do better because there are political considerations and crises and political diversions. I had a chance of asking recently the remarkable students of Dr. Peterson's class, you know, what are the top 2 to 3 points of conversation, the narratives that currently are heard in school board meetings across the country? Now, one would think, considering in the aftermath of the pandemic, that there would be achievement gaps, reading proficiency, math proficiency, lagging graduation rates, right, post-secondary success. One would think that would be controlling the narrative across the country. But that is not so. We are diverted towards conversations in the K-12 space about critical race theory, even though critical race theory, CRT, is not taught in K-12 institutions. We're drawn into conflicts specific to LGBTQ and trans rights when there's no crisis specific to that. It's a manufactured crisis. We respect and teach all students, accept all students. But these issues are being brought in because of political dynamic and hypercharged political radicalization of the narrative across the country. And unfortunately, it has permeated and invaded the K-12 space, particularly at the policy level. It is in that type of environment that we're doing our work, with a very demand-driven strategic plan that needs to be obtained within 4 years. And I believe the things will get us there are threefold. Number one, absolute universal coherence. That is something that we had in Miami-Dade. In a district like Los Angeles, 720 square miles, 540,000 students, a budget of $19.9 billion, by the way, $4.5 billion of that will disappear within the year as ESSER federal COVID recovery monies dry up. How do we do it? If we do not bring about systemic coherence to the district, considering the level of mobility, the transient nature of families, and we cannot guarantee the ease identification of curriculum materials, pacing guides, structures for student support, and teacher support, we will not win this battle. Just impossible. So bringing a degree of coherence to the system is key. We are well on our way, having, for the first time in the history of the district, adopted coherent, universal interim assessments, acceleration, remediation, software, digital content for all students. Being bold in adopting the best of the best for high dosage tutoring available for all students. Being bold in differentiating resource allocations to schools and students on the basis of the individual nature of the student himself or herself. Meaning this idea that everybody goes to school for the same amount of time and everybody gets the same resource, even though students have varying levels of readiness from school not just at third grade, which is a key marker in terms of lifelong viability as a student, but before the very first day students enter school. We know what the indicators are. So why not bring a great deal of coherence to the district and actually begin to teach kids at the age of 3 and 2 years in advance of the state mandate to have universal transitional kindergarten in every elementary schools? Why not do it right now if we have the money to do it right now using one-time ESSER funds? Why not dramatically expand public school offered options for students by first being bold and telling the community that in your zip code right now, there are 0 high quality, high demand programs. And for your child to get to those programs, they have to ride a bus 2 hours a day. Where is the equity in that? So bring coherence of purpose, of function, of investment, driven by the individual needs of students and communities is something that we felt was important to do, and we've done it. We have revamped, reformed resource allocation. We were bold enough to identify the 100 lowest performing schools in the district on the basis of a whole host of criteria, whether it's reading proficiency, math proficiency, graduation rates, attendance levels of students and workforce, critical incidents in the school, critical incidents around the school, safe passage issues, crime, homelessness encampments, you name it, reclassification rates for English language learners, complex dashboards that we were able to build and be able to track, allowing the identification of about 40,000 students who attend 100 schools. Second big shift is that those schools, yes, report to a principal, but those principals and the performance of those schools report directly to me. I want to be held accountable for the greatest challenge to the district, the greatest difficulty that the district will face. Myself and my cabinet, 4 times a year, we meet with those principals and we go through data dialogue specific to the needs of the school, best strategies, and the entire way to the school. During these data dialogues, under the Educational Transformation Office, which we created to support these 100 schools. During those times of interaction, that principal sitting at the same table as a superintendent of the cabinet, that principal has the power of a cabinet member during that time period. And the system has the responsibility to use all of its weight to support those teachers and that principal in a data-driven conversation and a practice-driven application of what will work in that school. The magical thing is that surrounding that interaction are groups of 30 to 40 principals, elementary, middle, and senior, specific grade level, who are listening to the best practices that that principal is speaking about. So the synergy and the ability to, in a very, very rapid format, principals hearing the best practices and the possible solutions and observing the entire weight of the system in solving problems in rapid form is working. It worked in Miami, is working in Los Angeles Unified. But that alone will not get us there. Yes, we have now done one reorganization where we cut $40 million from central office. We entered spring break last year, much like the rest of America, with 700 teacher vacancies in the second largest district in America. We came out of spring break last year with 0 teacher vacancies. Why? Because we identified teachers, professionals who were credentialed, could teach, once taught, and have told me all along how much they love kids. And we actually asked them to go be where the kids are, schools. And by credential matching, we were able to actually eliminate teacher vacancies last year. But since then, and this was part of the introduction, we have negotiated contracts for 99% of our workforce. So there's labor peace right now in Los Angeles Unified, as the rest of the country is dealing with labor strike. Whether we're talking about United Auto Workers, we're threatening a strike as we speak right now, the writers, the actors, hospital workers, hotel workers, you name it. There's a movement. And I believe that movement is a function of frustration coupled with unaffordability. I mean, whether we're talking about Miami or Los Angeles, these are 2 of the costliest cities in the country where housing unaffordability is a thing, where teachers, bus drivers cannot afford to live in the communities where they work. We needed to solve for that. So yes, we were bold in terms of what we negotiated, but now we have a runway of labor peace for 2 years to implement the best teaching and learning practices, and strategies. We did that last year. This year, we opened the second largest district in the country with 0 teacher vacancies. I know of no other district, large or small, that can boast about that. Yes, we recruited across the country the best and the brightest to come to teach in Los Angeles. We significantly improved the compensation schedule for teachers, but we also increased the demand for performance in terms of identifying those 100 schools and inviting the best and the best with financial incentives to teach in these schools. But that alone will not fix the problem. I think we're on the threshold of a real revolution in public education, a real revolution in America as we know it, if not the world. The advent of artificial intelligence can be a game changer. Now, I'm not talking about Chat GPT, which people are mesmerized by. When we talk about artificial intelligence, most people go to, if you're an educator, whether it's the K-12 environment or higher ed, the biggest concern, first of all, is cheating, plagiarism. I don't know, that's on the negative side. And we can fix for them. We can have solutions for them. How about the opportunities? How about the opportunities? Just imagine this. Imagine using all of the data that exists for Los Angeles Unified, specific to the 540,000 students. But let's look at one single kid, Jose Ramos. You see, we know that Jose this year already, within the first 3 weeks of school, Jose has been absent 4 days. And then we have data for the entire time that Jose has been enrolled as an LUSD student. And guess what? Last year was absent 19 days. The year before, during the pandemic, he was home but not engaged. We have end-of-year assessment data specific to Smarter Balance administered by the state that tell us how he performed at the end of the year. Not good data, because that's a post-mortem examination of something's already passed, right? Can't do anything about that. We have also interim assessment data because in our drive to coherence, we've adopted and acquired systemic means by which we periodically assess kids, but in a way that they are being assessed, but they're being taught. So acceleration, remediation are taking place simultaneously. We have all of that data. We have critical incident data for Jose's school, safe passage data, violence in the community data. We have IEP data for that child. We have so much data. Now, Jose Ramos has 540,000 colleagues. Artificial intelligence can actually turn all of that data for each one of those kids and generate an environment, an ecosystem of opportunity that meets students where they are because of the data we possess for them. Everybody knows Alexa, right? You speak to Alexa, Alexa will respond. Alexa, play me Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, and Alexa actually will tell you, here's Queen by Bohemian Rhapsody. But if you don't subscribe to a system where you pay, Alexa will say, let me play something similar to, until you pay your Amazon Prime or your music subscription. You can ask Alexa the time of day or the weather, and Alexa will tell you. You can ask Alexa whatever you want, Alexa will speak to you. Now, there isn't one person on the other side listening to every question and responding. No. There are a number of prompts, and there's artificial intelligence with generative AI and chatbots. They are processing the request and using the data they have in the system, but also data they've learned from you to be able to perfect your answer with every interaction that you have with the system. So just imagine this now, that we actually take the data and use a powerful, tested chatbot with strong artificial intelligence capability. And Jose Ramos now wakes up in the morning, and Ed, that's our application, Ed, Eduardo, Edwina, Ed, will say, good morning, Jose. You're a little late. You need to catch up. Don't forget to eat breakfast. By the way, we saw that you were absent school yesterday. We already told your mom about the fact that you were absent, and we sent a reminder to your counselor for an appointment for you to see her because you were absent very much last year. By the way, don't forget to log on to the application, Ed, there are some cool, innovative experiences for you. Now, every single student has gone through a survey of interest, like, what's your favorite color? Do you like this picture or this picture more? A number of experiences to allow the platform to learn you and to better customize an appealing environment that grabs your attention. And once your attention is grabbed for, I do not know how to teach the mind whose heart I don't touch. If we grab your attention, then we can, within the application, direct you seamlessly to experiences where reading and math, based on the information we have of you, are addressed. You have an ability to ask Ed anything you want. The family, the guardian, gets the nudges, the reminders, the incentives, and the rewards, much like the student. Now, just think about this being the reality, not just for Jose, but for 540,000 students. Now let's flip it. Just think about the data that we're getting from Jose and the other 540,000 students now being picked up by that one classroom teacher, where the classroom teacher on a daily basis can get reports, a dashboard specific to what's happening in those students' lives. Just imagine now the principal of those teachers being able to aggregate that information for every single student in their school. Imagine that information now being accessible to the superintendent, where we can real time, not wait until the end of the year to determine where our kids ended up in terms of reading or math, but actually being able to know what the temperature is every single day and being able to recalibrate real time, resource allocation support, professional development, rescheduling of schools, whatever it is, and being able to use that to then fashion and form recommendations, policy recommendations, and budgetary recommendations to the board. That's the power of the disruption that AI brings to K-12 education, not as a replacement for human talent. It will never happen, but as a complement to what teachers and principals do in the schools. Now, you're probably thinking, is this science fiction? I mean, how many years are we away from this implementation? Actually, not. We're at beta level development. We partnered with an entity, put on an RFP about 7-8 months ago, selected an entity, got our architects and engineers, IT, to collaborate with private sector entities. This became such a hot idea that we're not paying for anything. Private sector entities and philanthropy and foundations have a great deal of interest in the development of this. Our idea is to implement it now that we've tested in a number of schools. First test was with hundreds of adults as students using real student data to interact with the system, to begin to mature the system, preloading all kinds of questions, prompts, and answers, and allow the system to generate ideas learned from itself. I myself populate the system, and I try to ask the craziest questions of the system to test it. We are weeks away from the launch of ED in Los Angeles. First, in the 100 schools, the priority schools that report directly to me, 40,000 students. And we believe by the second quarter, 540,000 students. ED will be a disruption that I believe will democratize and level the playing field for every single student, every single community. We can do this because we've reached universal connectivity and device empowerment for every single student. We forced private sector entities that do business with us on the basis of best in class to play in the same sandbox and open channels for data sharing, considering privacy, data privacy issues that we have to negotiate through to ensure that these platforms become an integrated ecosystem for learning for every single student. So I'll close by saying this. I'm proud of what we did in Miami, but the possibility of Los Angeles is immense. Artificial intelligence coupled with this almost obsessive drive towards coherence, an alignment of resources, human talent, retooling and reskilling, labor peace, preloaded on the basis of negotiations, and now amplification of choice before and after school programming, partnerships with the community, and AI through ED will bring about a new era of student outcomes, the likes of which I believe will not be reached by any other large district, or certainly as large as Los Angeles, and there's only one who's larger, and that's New York. I was superintendent in Miami. I was appointed chancellor of New York City. I decided not to go to New York City and remain in Miami. I've been asked to be superintendent in Los Angeles 4 times over the past decade, and I felt that this was the right time to make the move. And we will prove, as I close, repeating what I said, that since kids have the same number of chromosomes, regardless of which coast they live in, their ability should be fully exercised, and their capacity should be fully enabled. I've never met broken children. I've met challenged children. Never met broken children, but I've seen and transformed systems of adults that often break their dreams and their aspirations. So what we do as teachers, as principals, as board members, as commissioners, as chairs of the boards of education for states and communities, as superintendents, is actually turn the impossible into the inevitable. And what I've learned in 17 years as a superintendent, 32 years as an educator, as a proud immigrant to this country, is that the journey from the impossible to the inevitable is achieved on the basis of 3 things: belief, smart belief, skill. Science is important, but most importantly, the one thing that we often lack in systems, not just educational systems, political systems, will. The strength, the determination to do right, regardless of threat, in terms of doing right. So thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll open up for questions. I'll throw one out to get it started, but hopefully folks in the room will chime in. First of all, just one comment is in addition to appreciating the ambition and the vision grounded in practice and experience that you bring. I'm very grateful for your optimism, because there's a lack of it out there, and I think all of this begins and is sustained by a sense that we can actually make a difference, and your living testimony.
Thank you.
One thing you said, which was jarring in some ways, although not unexpected, is that there's a $20 billion budget and a $4 billion of which is ESSER money, or it's federal money. I'm not sure if the numbers are exactly correct there, but that sounds like a pretty daunting fiscal cliff in about 12 months. What's your sense for how the districts can respond to this this change in the fiscal condition? Is it, figure out how to plug the hole with more resources? Is it try to ensure that the funds that are being spent are being invested in one-time expenses? Or are you sort of anticipating a pretty tough year coming next year?
A tough year is certainly a possibility, but the solution lies with the latter 2 pronouncements you just mentioned, rather than the former. So it will be virtually impossible to fill the hole. I'm aware of the political dynamics in Washington, D.C. There'll be no appetite, considering what will be happening in 2024, to fill the hole. It is virtually impossible. We're also aware, in terms of state budget, where the reality lies. So we ought to prepare for that massive loss. Advocate for more resources, but prepare for the loss. So the solutions lie with, quite frankly, leveraging the possibility of something we began last year: zero-based budgeting, increased efficiencies, better, smarter ways of procuring services and goods for the system, more realistic understanding, not just of what you budget, but actually what you spend, and bringing in efficacy models that actually look at impact, rather than continue to invest the same thing into systems that, quite frankly, don't produce the results. In addition to that, is really focusing on protecting schools, protecting programs that direct impact to the students at the expense of everything else. So we did a $40 million massive reorganization of central office last year. We're probably going to redouble our efforts. In fact, work has already began, and we will shave about $250 million off of procurement efficiencies and non-school site expenditures. In addition to that, we need to look at rates of attrition and focus on not rehiring every single position that becomes vacant, particularly in the administrative level, to protect what's spent and needed in schools. Then there's an opportunity also to retire old debt, even though interest rates have shifted significantly. Since I arrived in LA, we've been able to back go to New York and advocate our theory of action and improve the credit rating with all credit rating agencies. That's saving us millions of dollars in interest as we don't buy everything cash, right? Or we don't build in terms of availability of cash. So there are a number of strategies that we are employing. The two biggest ones, I'll save those for last, is again, the unnatural. And I appreciate you saying that. I am an optimist. I mean, I came to this country alone. I lived under the bridge. I'm doing what I'm doing and speaking to you at Harvard. I have no option other than being optimistic. It's worked out for me. The question is, how do we make it work for everybody else, right? The two biggest elements that we are working on is considering how education is funded in the state of California, disproportionately looking at the average daily attendance, boosting average daily attendance. Chronic absenteeism is the number one issue impacting education in America today. Over 40% of kids across America are chronically absent. I cannot teach the absent child. And since there is a direct connection between funding and average daily attendance, it makes sense. Kids need to be in school to learn. And if kids are not in school, everybody else who is in school pays the price because they do not leverage the funding that was promised them. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, for every 1% of average daily attendance improvement in LA, that's $62 million. We ended last year, opened up this year, and we are already at attendance levels parallel to those of pre-pandemic times, 94 to 95%. If we stay that course for the rest of the year, we will see dozens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, materialize into our budget, which will be reflected next year. The second element, enrollment. So as you probably know, Los Angeles Unified has been bleeding out, as is the case in most urban districts across America, enrollment. I made a promise that we were going to turn that tide. LA had been losing enrollment at around 6 to 7% per year. Last year was the lowest level, 1.8%. Still losing enrollment, but a much slower pace. I believe we will stabilize enrollment loss this year, and we will actually increase enrollment beginning next year. Increased enrollment, increased average daily attendance efficiencies will get us through the potential for this fiscal cliff in September 2024.
Great, thank you. Questions? Yes.
You know, we led with truth right at the beginning. I think as we were about to launch ED, we were very cognizant of some of the labor challenges, which are real. I mean, if what you do for a living is you're a writer, but there's a system out there that can replace your talent with a high level of effectiveness, that's jarring. And by the way, our society is not ready for that shift. Because of the implications it has on the labor force. This is not like automation. It's not. This is different. This is different. And insufficient regulatory measures, policies, protocols, understanding, responsible use of resources, digital citizenship. We have not done any of that. We need to do that, right? Before we jump that gun. So what we decided to do to your question is actually lead with the truth and begin by telling people at the same time what this will do, but absolutely what this will not do. And I think we've been successful at it. I think we've been successful in painting the picture and telling the story of possibility specific to AI in the educational space as a complement, as an environmental ecosystem of learning on the basis of the resources we have and the data we possess, rather than a substitute for any work done by anybody. It's a connector, it's a reminder. It's the ability to have personal contact with students at any time, 24/7, anytime, anywhere, meeting them where they are. That is not a replacement for a teacher. Actually, in many ways, as I described, this will nudge and create reminders and create appointments between students and staff, with a psychologist or an attendance counselor, a psychiatric social worker. It actually, I think, will increase in some ways the potential of contact between students and resources, particularly human resources within the system. So we've been, I believe, effective and successful at demystifying and negating the negative possibility of impression associated with this by telling the truth of possibility associated. I I think I had to make 10 mistakes for every one right decision, right? Fall 8 times, stand up 9, and you win. So there were many examples of mistakes that I've personally made in Miami, and I'm responsible for all of them. I had the best team in Miami. I have the best team now in LA. I assume responsibility for mistakes. And the team assumes the responsibility and the credit for the wins, for the successes. But I do think that there's truth to what you said. The fact that I did learn from a lot of mistakes we made positioned me better in terms of being much more effective and enable a much swifter deployment and execution of a plan than I did in Miami. In Miami, we spent a lot of time designing the plane and flying it at the same time, because there was an urgency. Used a lot of those best practices in addition to actual existence research. First thing we did upon arriving in LA was everybody had to read Fullen's books on coherence and fashion the theory of action on the basis of that almost obsessive embracing of coherent practices. Kids are too precious, too important for us to experiment with them. So let's deploy, execute what we know works. Science of reading works. What effective professional development is. Micro-certification credentialing for teachers. Diversifying the experience of a school day or school year. We know what works, right? And so the implementation execution has been much faster because of those learnings. I've made some mistakes in LA, and I admit to them. I think right at the beginning, I may be underestimated to a certain extent some of the frustration that goes back years in terms of workplace conditions, in terms of from the perspective of the worker. A bus driver in LA cannot make $15 an hour. Cafeteria worker cannot make $15 an hour. They need to live. They need to survive. And teachers ought to have safety and security if we're going to make extreme demands on them in terms of realizing the potential for their kids. So I believe I made some mistakes in terms of maybe not immediately recognizing the level of frustration that some members of the workforce felt. I felt, I just arrived here. It's not my fault. No, but there's a systemic fault, and you're the guy in charge. So we're gonna direct that fire at you. We've learned, we've recalibrated, we perfected the approach. I think we're in the better place. And I can promise you, I'll continue to make mistakes. Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I am Pradeep, I'm from India. I have joined here in the research fellow in the South Asian Institute. I'm working in the area of education policy in the developing country context, particularly in India. My question is, when you go for any reforms, educational reforms, either administrative or the ground level, there is always a huge political intervention.
A huge political what?
Intervention, like political pressure. Intervention, political
Sure.
kind of. There is a top level, there will be many pressure on the educational administrators. And it becomes difficult for the administrators, like superintendents and all educational superintendents. We call them as educational administrators in India. So they are at the district level, at the higher level, at the state level. So they actually get difficult to implement the things because always you ask like look for better things, but there is always something like political pressure not to do those things because that will create problem in the system to some people which are favoring to the political parties. So that political interference creates a chaos in the educational administration. So how you look at it in this context? Do you find such issues here or is it very independent like in Google is very independent like keeping the political things aside?
Yeah.
Because in India, education is highly political.
Sure.
So that's the one.
No, there are in America, there are no political pressures associated. No, yeah, right. No, the political pressures exist. The political pressures exist, but leadership and effective leadership is measured not in you acquiescing to the political pressures. Political leadership, particularly in the field of education, if in fact your end goal is to elevate performance for students. Political leadership, by definition almost, defines the individual whose actions are acknowledging of the political pressures, but not victimized by the political pressures or acquiescing to the political pressures. You know, I told my board in Miami and I tell my board in the community in LA that I have no problem working in a way that may get me fired. That's a complete abandonment of what some people feel they need to do to get by. So I want to dispose of that. You know, says, you know what, when you go to war, you can die. And if you accept that up front, you probably will fight the better war. And in education, it's the same thing. So slaying the political sacred cows up front is a good practice. Declaring to individuals what your line in the sand is, over which no one crosses in terms of political influence, in terms of directing contracts to entities that don't deserve them, private sector entities because they have no credibility, no results. Being able to elevate the needs of students while simultaneously respecting the workforce, and enforcing the best practice to be what's embraced and deployed. Because you can always reflect and point to why you're doing what you're doing. So, you know, over the past 17 years, yeah, I've experienced a lot of political pressure. That comes with the territory. But the fact that there's political pressure does not mean that you need to acquiesce to it. And I think that defines ultimately the type of outcomes that you're able to obtain. So the political pressures are there, but you know what? Leadership is not acquiescing to the political pressure. Leadership is elevating the best practice, having the courage to execute with high levels of fidelity despite the political pressure. At the end of the day, I'm accountable to kids. I'm accountable to the workforce, to our teachers. I'm accountable to the parents. I'm not accountable to a politician or a pressure that could divert my attention or deviate my intention from doing the right thing.
In India, if you do such thing like in some cases, you will be punished and penalized. You will be transferred to different places.
Sure.
You'll be doing.
You know, look, I've been threatened. When I was in Florida, the governor threatened to get rid of me. The governor threatened to take my salary. You know what I said? Take it away. When under this obsessive issue over immigration, the government, under the previous administration, actually, 2 administrations ago, was threatening to deport a student who, much like me, was unaccompanied in this country. I let a student walk out, and I said, if this kid is deported, I will resign my position as superintendent. So, meet political pressure with equally forceful, courageous disposition. And so what? You know what? In your country, there's one remarkable example of somebody with nothing more than a sheet wrapped around his body who stopped a mighty empire. So leadership matters.
So I want to bring in a question from the chat. You talked about enrollment and trying to increase enrollment or reverse the trend, and obviously there's been some success in the last year. What are the strategies for getting students back into the system?
Right. So we're actually, that's another element that AI will help us. AI helps with attendance. AI will help us with this ecosystem of knowledge, of support. But we've been savvy in doing work. Number one, a lot of people had given up. They thought, the kids are just not here. And then we decided to actually take to the streets. And I invited my colleagues and board members, myself, everybody, actually by the hundreds to scour the community and to begin knocking on the doors and working with social agencies and city and county government, utilizing child find systems to make contact with the last point of contact we had with that family and kid. And guess what? A lot of kids that we thought had left LA were in LA. And this is really a crucial point. We had kids who stopped going to school and nobody went to look for them. They thought that they had left the country. Huge number of immigrant families afraid of government stopped sending kids to school. You had very, very young kids recently arrived in the country whose parents don't know of their responsibility of enrolling kids in school. You had 15, 16-year-old kids who come in, may look like an adult, went directly into the workforce, bypassing high school. We found a lot of those kids. I actually coined this term, the lost kids of Los Angeles. And I know there are lost kids in Miami, there are lost kids in Chicago, there are lost kids, I'm sure, right here in Boston, around the corner. So we made it our business to actually make those connections and bring kids back. Secondly, massive amount of community awareness that we bought with radio promos in a multitude of languages, with ads and billboards. Actually, go to LA right now, you will see ads in a number of languages saying, we need you, we want you. Third, there's nothing like improving what you do to convince the community that may be you're worth of their investment of sending their kids to school. So we're just at the beginning, a little over a year, not enough time, but I know if we improve our performance, if we improve our delivery of services, parents will trust us more. And that includes not just what we teach and how we teach, but also what we feed kids. So yes, I bring in star chefs and bring in the media to inform what our kids should eat. And then we bring in the kids and we do test kitchen experiences where the kids thumbs up, thumbs down, they'll say, yes, I want to eat this every day in my cafeteria or not. We're changing that experience. Creating alliances with community agencies by hiring community ambassadors. Sometimes I cannot penetrate into Watts or Boyle Heights or Southeast LA because I may not know the community. But there are individuals, natural born leaders in those communities that if I hire them, they know exactly where the kids are. So we began doing that. Community ambassadors going to the community, bringing the kids back, speaking with the parents in a way that parents will trust. So that's what's working. But ultimately, and this is the second phase, is performance. You improve performance, reading proficiency, math proficiency, graduation rate, post-secondary placement, post-secondary success, right? And people will believe it. But that takes a little bit more time. But there are organic steps you can take right off the bat.
We had a presentation last semester, someone from Denver who sort of made very much the same last point, which was as Denver performance became better and is perceived as being better and driven in large part, or at least in part, by the portfolio school model, that the people actually started coming back. Even and that wasn't a function of just general population increase and surrounding districts all seeing increases. Actually was unique to Denver.
Right.
So you have your hand up.
Yes.
Hi.
Back on the political question, there's been a number of troubling laws passed and suits across the country, specifically in Florida, dictating certain curriculum changes, dictating what teachers can and can't talk about, especially as it relates to gender and sexuality. I'm curious, what you see your role as an administrator of a school district and preventing those types of laws from passing, and anything that you think others should be doing
Right.
to help.
Right. What do you think my role is?
Well, you talked about, laying down the idea of if people you could walk away,
Right.
or you could not take a salary, right? But if these things are happening at a state level, I wonder kind of how you bring your power to that.
You know, the role of a superintendent, particularly in a large district, you're invariably going to be the largest employer with the largest budget. The media will show up anytime you call. You can dominate the space. You certainly can have a voice. The reason why I asked what do you think I would do is because you know I'm easily Googleable and I take positions. I choose to take positions. So the political pressures, I choose to be political in my job, not partisan politics. But you know, Pericles said that if you don't play politics, politics will play you. I'd rather be at the table than on the plate. Always a better option. So what I can tell you is I do have experience when I lived in Florida. I think that it's a very slippery slope once you embrace. And look, I believe in alignment of resources, content to age and grade. Don't get me wrong. But there are processes by which that is legitimately done, rather than what happened recently. There's a poem read during the inauguration of a president that was contested in a district in Florida. And just like that, one single person raised the issue and the poem was removed. And the next thing is book banning, which has taken place. And the next thing is, whether directly, indirectly, is the diminishing of one's worth on the basis of the type of programming of recognition, just because of who you are, whether you're LGBTQ, immigrant, what have you. Once you begin to ask those questions, and once you begin to draft policy that is at least interpreted by some, my question is always, you know, how do you think that person feels? When at a recent board meeting in my former district, people showed up in black shirts and saying, you know, shoot the pedophile in your neighborhood, referring to individuals who are LGBTQ. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. So what do? I take it on. I show up at that party, unabashedly unafraid of the consequence. And it's when we cave to the fear that we become part of the problem. So I use the bully pulpit. I use the position of superintendent. Some people will criticize. Some people will say in my social media feed, they will say, "You're the superintendent of schools. Why are you in that?" I said, "Well, because you know, my students and my workforce are in that, so I cannot remove myself from that. And what power do you think you have over me to tell me where I should go?" So yeah, I think it's very evident what I would do.
So we're at time. Any concluding remarks before we?
I will repeat what I said at the last class that I taught. You know, I'm an immigrant by choice, not by chance. Education turned a once poor kid in this country, who once was homeless, into the educator, superintendent I am today. We're living difficult times in America. The one solution that's always worked is education. 150 years ago, 90% of Americans were educated in public schools. Today, 90% of Americans 150 years ago were educated in public schools. Today is the same percentage. So that's a golden opportunity to actually build a more perfect union. It's a perfect stage to actually create a better nation through education. I believe public education and democracy are two sides of the same American coin. Nurture one, the other one prospers. Undermine one, the other one suffers. And we're seeing examples of that today. So the journey from the impossible to the inevitable, the impossible challenges a lot of our kids face, whether it's poverty, language acquisition, disability, you name it, we know it. That journey from the impossibility of their condition to the inevitability of their success is traveled by three elements: believe, skill, and will. I believe that education is the solution. So I choose to live it and work it. Skill for science is important. Let's not deny it. But then the one thing that was actually the focus of at least two questions: will. You may have all the belief in the world, you may have all the skill in the world. If you have no courage to do that which is right and good for kids, nothing will happen. So belief, skill, and will can turn anyone's impossible into everyone's inevitable. And that is why I do what I do. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much.